Okay, let's call this meeting of the Urbana Civilian Police Review Board to order. Roll call, please.
Tom Costello.
Here.
Ricardo Diaz.
Here.
Scott Dossett.
Here.
Diane Gattile. Here. James McNeely. Ivy Williams.
Here.
Does anybody have any changes to the agenda? Anyone? Hearing none, we'll let the agenda stand as is. Approval of the minutes. Can I have a motion, please?
Motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay. Before we get to the staff report, I would just like to take chair privilege for a moment to recognize one of our own, Ivy Williams, who was recently recognized by the Urbana Half Century Club for her service to the community, both as an individual and as an educator. And for that, we say thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, Mr. Rent, we're ready for you.
All right. In terms of new complaints, there were none filed prior to the filing of the or the distribution of the packet. We've since had one filed yesterday, so we have a single new complaint. Otherwise, there are no other pending.
How many do we have outstanding?
The only ones we have outstanding are those that are on hold based upon some type of pending court case.
Okay.
And I think there are perhaps 3 of those maximum.
Okay. Okay. Is that it?
Yes.
Any other questions for staff? Public participation? Seeing none, I think we'll continue on to old business. Todd, do you want to bring that in and bring the chief, if you want to introduce chief and then have him
Sure.
come on up and talk to us, please?
Sure. If everyone remembers at the last meeting, the chief visited and requested the formation of a policy or TASER policy development subcommittee. That subcommittee has subsequently met and put together a draft. The chief is here to present the draft and sort of present his next steps in terms of where he wants to go at this point.
Why don't we remind people who that committee was?
Oh, yes. The committee was composed of Ricardo Diaz and Scott Dossett.
Okay. Thank you. Chief, I think we're ready for your presentation.
Very good. Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. First and foremost, I want to thank you all for taking the time to be a part of this policy and process development for the implementation of the TASERs. At the July 23rd meeting, I presented each of you with a book containing a number of policies, a great deal of background information, and at that time I requested a subcommittee of 2 members to assist in the development of the draft policy. I'm happy to report that with a great deal of input from Scott Dossett and Ricardo Diaz, as well as Rich Searles from the department, we have developed what I believe to be a very workable policy concerning the use of TASERs. The draft policies were provided in your packet, and I hope that you've had an opportunity to review them. In addition to the draft policy, I asked Todd Rent to assist me with preparing a workable process for updating what I call Chapter 5 of the CPRB policy so that we can articulate how the process will be, how it will run through and how we will document everything. We can talk a little bit about that later. We've had several logistical questions about that, but I believe we're getting much closer to getting those issues resolved as well. Before taking questions and comments about the draft policy, I wanted to publicly recognize and thank Scott Dossett and Ricardo Diaz for their work and their input. They both sacrificed a great deal of their own personal time and helped create a draft that they both obviously gave a great deal of thought and process to before presenting it. And as a matter of fact, if either of you would like to share any comments or thoughts about the process or about those, or if you would like to interject anything during this presentation, I would welcome it because you both shared a lot of great information and you can help justify some of the reasons if it comes to question. So with that, I will certainly take any questions about the policy itself. Each of you got that in your packet. I think the the process by which we have the TASER policy, we can go through, and if you have any questions or issues concerning why we're doing it a certain way, with respect to the process, I think the easiest way to do this, to make it the simplest, there were several questions about some logistics concerning timing, and what do we do if a video review is up and then a person files a citizen complaint subsequent to that. So I think to make this incredibly clean, what we will do is I will ask that we handle the review of the tasers using the same timelines and oversight with respect to policy and procedure that we do for the CPRB complaint process. And that's going to make it abundantly clear to everybody as far as time frame and the way that it should work, and that way we're not confusing anybody with the issue as well. So that would be my recommendation to the City Council. With respect to the,
Hold on, Chief, just for a second, because that confused me. The review of TASER policy, as in the process of creating this policy, will go as when we create any changes to the Police Review Board. So you mentioned that we would follow the same procedure as, and I don't know what we're comparing. I
okay,
didn't quite-
when I say procedure, when a citizen complaint comes in, I would report that information to Mr. Rent. When a video comes in as the result of a TASER deployment, I will report that information to Mr. Rent. So the same procedure that we use for the CPRB
Complaints,
we will use for the TASER deployment.
okay.
So let me, just for my clarification as well. So what we're really doing is saying, we're going to have identical timelines, is that what we're saying?
Correct.
Okay, so we will have identical timelines for, with how we handle the TASER issues as we do for complaints.
Right, and one of the questions that was brought up, and it was logical, a very logical question, was, so we have an event where a TASER is deployed, we go to the state's attorney's office, the state's attorney's office says, this is clearly something that I will release, it's not going to be a pending criminal investigation, therefore, if you want to proceed with the review, the TASER review with the Civilian Police Review Board, you can do that. And so we present that, and then a week later, hypothetically, the person who was involved in that event felt that they were mistreated, and they filed a citizen complaint against the officer for whatever reason. The question then became, so how do we handle that? Do we review the whole process again, or do we present the police department's findings and then allow the complaining party to come in later, which may not be fair to him or her because the decision was already made without all the adequate information? So that was a very viable question that was posed, so I thought in order to make it as clean as possible, we would use the same time frame as a civilian complaint so that we don't encounter those types of situations. Does that make sense?
If you don't mind, having read quite a bit about this and getting caught up in so much of the language that needs to be carefully considered, the public isn't that well informed as to what our process is. So essentially, that would be treated like a complaint in terms of timeline, and in the same procedure, because it goes up to you, and then so it's almost expedited in that it goes through you very fast because the complaint is put forward, and then it comes to us. Because that's I don't know, Todd, if you could review for us what is that timeline? 30 days review, because I think many people won't have listened to what that timeline is until now, that this is a very important matter.
So typically an individual, or I think according to the ordinance, they have 45 working days to file a complaint under the ordinance. And I think my impression of what would happen to avoid sort of the conflicts between the two jurisdictions would be that you would have to allow that time frame to actually run out, right? And then at that point, perhaps do the taser review. Because if you do it at any time prior to that point, exactly what the chief said will happen. If you all review it and you make some type of, let's just talk hypothetically, if you all reviewed it and made some type of determination, and then subsequent to that, in that 45-day window, the individual filed a complaint, then you would be being asked to review something that you've already reviewed, but you're also being asked to do that impartially, and that would represent a difficulty. So maybe a more accurate way of saying is not that the times are overlapping, but that if there would be a review, it would most likely have to occur after the time limit had expired for filing the complaint. Or if a complaint is filed, then you just do it sort of concurrently as part of the process. Does that make sense?
So it makes sense that a person that has a complaint has 45 days to file.
Yes,
And
sir.
in this case, the review would happen, the review of a taser deployment, you give the chance for the person to file a regular complaint. Because you're giving those 45 days anyway.
Correct.
We have to abide by those.
Correct.
And then there is more time to do taser or a complaint on use of taser? Or
No,
no, because it's
typically-
the same time?
Typically, and again, we have to look at cycles, but you meet quarterly, you as a group meet quarterly. So quarterly, any of those deployments that fall within that time frame, if a citizen complaint were filed about that, we would conduct our investigation, we would present our findings, and it would all be done in that same time frame, should the state's attorney say, yes, you can move forward
right.
with this. Like, again, this is very similar, it's identical to any citizen complaint.
Yeah.
The citizen complaint process is stopped. As Todd mentioned earlier, there are 3 cases that are pending because there are criminal cases pending on those cases. So until those cases are resolved, the Civilian Police Review Board process,
Does not
as
start.
defined by the policy, are holding off on making their decision until after the criminal case is conducted and completed. So the same would hold true with respect to a taser deployment.
Okay, so just, and I hate to be overbearing, but I think the public, so a person, if when they have a complaint, they have 45 days to do it, and then it gets turned into you, the chief or your designee
Correct.
does an investigation.
Correct.
And there is a finding made, and it is when that finding is not in agreement with the original filer, the citizen, that it comes to us. I'm understanding the process correctly.
Correct.
That's right. And so, and there is 30 days or a couple of weeks or something in which a person takes the next step and brings it.
Correct.
All right. And that's what we're talking about would still apply for a taser deployment complaint.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
I wanted to ask both of you as our representative, when you were working on this, were you spending, I mean, I think this is a good policy that you've come up with. Did you work on marrying this with our existing policies in terms of how we deal with that? I mean, obviously, that's one area. Other areas, do we need to make it clearer, for example, that says, okay, we look at this, and here's the findings that we can come up with? Was that part of your discussion? Or, kind of, Ricardo, going along with you said, is there a way that we need to make it a little bit clearer that we're going to follow our existing policy as in regards to this, the same way we do anything else?
I think we're off track by even having this discussion. In fact, how to lace this into the rest of the work that the committee does was not part of our discussion at all.
Okay.
And so I think we're a little
Okay.
off track by
Right.
talking about how the committee does procedures. I felt at least the dialogue during the meetings was that we were trying to come up with a policy literally about the use of the taser, the kind of equipment that was going to be acquired by the city, should it be acquired, and concerns about special populations and concerns about retrieving data. Once we started talking about the TASER CAM issue, we necessarily had to kind of get into some reporting, and there's a big section in here about how we will get information. But we could spin off pretty quickly into the difference between an incident and a deployment. And I hope we have that conversation tonight. But beyond that point, we really didn't attempt to, besides kind of a passing understanding that this was going to become part of the ordinance, really think through those numbers about that reporting. At least I don't remember a lot of conversation about that.
Right, and quite frankly, I kind of relied on Todd Rent and Tony to help me with that portion of it, because that's more, I don't think that type of information belongs in the police department policy. It belongs in the policy and protocol of the CPRB.
And I guess I can confirm what will happen with that portion, with the lacing the two together. If it occurs, it will be my office working with the legal department. So it'll be me working with legal in order to make that happen.
So I have one more question
Sure.
on process, if we're okay. Our role as the review board is to work, and I think, on policy development, and then this policy goes to city council in the future, and
Correct.
they're the ones that really have the decision power as to both purchase and policy details.
Correct.
So ours is an advisory. We're suggesting, but we don't make the final decision. Whatever we put out goes to city council and they decide. Is
The
this
only
correct?
thing I would add to that, though, I think is, and you feel free to disagree, but I've always felt when we were presented with this issue that the three things we thought were absolutely crucial were training, supervision, and accountability. And the accountability portion, if the council were to go forward with this, the accountability portion rests, I guess, in equal measure with the police department to see that deployment was appropriate and with us to make sure that was appropriate. And so we still, no matter who, once it's approved, should it be approved by the council, the accountability portion, I think, really rests on our shoulders. And I think that that's an important thing for us to realize as well.
Yeah, I agree completely, and that's why I hate for it to get mixed in with the policy component right now, because at least I'm not ready to talk about that.
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
Okay. All right, Pat, do you have more stuff that you want to present?
I do not, other than if there's any questions concerning the development of the draft policy, we will be certainly, either Rich or Scott or Ricardo or I can answer those questions.
Well, I was going to say, I want to defer to our two members.
Sure.
And see if they have any additional insights or concerns subsequent to them doing that we ought to be discussing this evening, or you feel that we ought to be discussing this evening.
I guess, I don't know at what point to bring it up, but for me, learning about the details of, as far as process, the notebook was very good for me anyway to read up and see everything. I found it very enlightening to read up what everybody else is doing. And then at the last meeting, maybe it was the meeting before, we've had 2 or 3 meetings, to see what other jurisdictions use as a log and the occurrence, the number of occurrences per month. Because ultimately, I think this is arising out of a need to have another option in Urbana. And to see what others are doing was very informative. And yet at the same time, I feel like I'm barely now grasping several of these, if you will, the 3 parts of the issues. And it's made me wonder, because I've asked several people, and today I got 2 calls leading up to this meeting. There is a lot to process here. And so I look forward to see how we include other people into this so that this committee puts down the legwork of providing the policy, but lots of eyes see it. This will affect all of our community, hopefully not very often, but when it does, it'll be very tense moments, and therefore, we should all at least have had a good chance to hypothetically consider where things should end up.
Scott?
Well, I mean, hopefully everyone's had a chance to take a look at the policy and come to their own conclusions about it. But I think it's worth kind of just running through the salient characteristics of what we've got here. I agree with the chief after doing a lot of reading that we've got a conservative application principle here, 2 levels of training necessary for an officer to be able to carry a taser, both routine department training and critical crisis incident team training, which we've kind of, as a side issue, worked on a little bit of material to go on the web so that people understand what that's about, and I don't know where we're at with that, if that's up on the website now or not. One of the things we talked a lot about were special populations. As you look at the National Institute of Justice report and reports from Amnesty International, it's obvious that we have some special populations with which special precautions should be made. And I think the policy lays out pretty plainly what our philosophy is about that, while trying to maintain flexibility in terms of how an incident is managed by a police officer. Just because someone is in a wheelchair doesn't necessarily mean they wouldn't be capable of harming another individual, and that some kind of an application might be necessary. The other thing I think that was really I feel really good about is, without getting too much into training, although we were helped by Mr. Searles and Pat both in terms of training, this policy very deliberately tries to capture literally the moment that the taser is removed from a holster and whatever happens beyond that point. And this group will get the opportunity to review that audio and video that will come from the taser cam. So this is kind of the difference between an incident and a deployment. We ended up defining a deployment as when the taser was actually activated and shot at someone. Well, there's a lot of background, a lot of data to suggest that simply the display of a taser or a perpetrator knowing that the taser might be used can actually gain compliance. And so we're going to have the opportunity to look at the entire period of those incidents, whether or not in finality the taser was deployed. The other thing I think we have in the policy is some good, reasonable guidelines about medical intervention right after deployment. It was a big concern of mine because, again, there's a lot of things that you read about tasers in terms of not only problems with physically removal of the darts that the taser deploys, but with people who may be under what's kind of called excited delirium, although there's debate about that term, but people who have got a lot of drug load in their body or may have some other kind of physiological thing going on that's kind of probably led in to the event of the deployment. And so we're going to get those people help by trained people, both for removal and in terms of any kind of after symptoms after use, with good supervisor review. So I mean, when these things come out of the holster, we're going to have the shift supervisor, if that's the correct term, looking at that and understanding what happens. So anyway, I've just kind of reviewed a couple of the points that I thought were real salient. That, I mean, in some cases we spent 45 minutes or more apiece during 2 or 3 meetings trying to hammer out what we thought were in the policy that we thought was in the best interest of the community. So
I have 2 comments, and you've prompted them. Thank you, Scott. One, and I'm not sure maybe Chief, you can help me. We talked about a pilot period in which reporting would be more detailed. And I don't see that in the policy, but maybe Todd or you can tell me where that kicks in.
Well, my thought was when again, the protocol, because it's a pilot, the protocol will be using that, literally tracking every time the taser comes out of the holster so that we get an idea. And if in fact the taser was not deployed, the darts being shot, but instead it was removed from the holster and mere compliance was gained by the fact that it was in the officer's hand in a justifiable situation, those will be captured by video. And during as I understood it, the 6-month program, the pilot program, we were going to present all of those to the CPRB so that the CPRB would have a feel for when the taser was actually being removed from the holster. Now, there was a lot, again, we're reducing this to a few minutes when it was 45 minutes of debate as to how much time do you think we have to review every ARC test or every time the device was removed from the holster. So that's why we said what was suggested was we'll try it for a 6-month period. If the board feels comfortable that it's not necessary to keep looking at these anymore, then we'll filter that out and just go with actual deployments. If, however, because you will have a list of every time the taser was removed from the holster, or we could spot check them. I'm comfortable with that as well. Whatever you.
Yeah. So my question is, where is that written?
Well,
Because we talked about it, but I don't know where it is, 'cause
It's
not
not
in this section.
written, but it will be added as part of the protocol under the CPRB
Okay.
guidelines, not under the police department policy.
Okay, so it's, that one's not in policy.
Correct.
So let me say one more thing related to this policy, and that is, what is the proper word? It absorbs every recommendation made by the ACLU. It absorbs the NAMI ones, and it goes a little bit more beyond. In fact, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is probably the most conservative policy, usage policy in our whole area. There is no one that will keep track as much for incidents, usage, whatever else, and also that limits their use, you know, both in training and in philosophy as to when they are to be deployed. Is this correct?
It is correct.
Okay.
I couldn't say it any better, and the reality is, my concern is that we have to have police officers who don't have the capability of dealing with a mental health issue or an issue that requires them to take measures that are going to stop a person from killing themselves. And I'm more than willing to say, in these limited events, I'm 100% comfortable with oversight. I'm comfortable with the restrictions. I'm comfortable with not using the drive stun, which is a term that is used as a pain compliance instead of a neuromuscular control of the body. So in order to eliminate any question or alleviate a lot of those concerns, we just removed them from the policy. So you're right. NAMI's recommendations, the ACLU's recommendations were all incorporated in our limited policy. And it is a limited policy.
Yes, it is. So if you don't mind, I don't know, Tom, procedure, but I would like to at least read part of what this policy is so that people are alerted to what's in it and that there is a healthy discussion period as to where it is. Because one, these proceedings go on video, and unless they have the document in front of them, you know, they don't have a sense of it. And two, I think that as there are different sections of the community that need to know that this is coming. They need to provide their feedback and then take ownership just as we are. That is, it takes a long time to try to draft something and project into the future. And so everybody that has a stake or will want to have a stake ought to review it and have their say, you know, before it goes forward, too much forward. And I understand that we have, there are procedures for that input to be done, but I think the rest of the board members got this, how many days ago? 1 or 2? I don't know when you sent it. Friday. So you've had several days to look at it, but for me, it took me a while to absorb everything. I read a good portion of the book initially, and then I started thinking, and then it wasn't until after the meetings. So what I'm saying is that we read a little bit of it today, and then we provide a period, a community meeting. I know officially we don't meet till January, but I would be happy to participate in a meeting in the community in which everyone that has anything to say says it. So
Well, Mr. Diaz, I'm going to argue that that type of information needs to go before the city council, not before this board. My opinion is that once this board is prepared to say, yes, we're ready, we'll create, now we will work on creating the procedure for it, and we will share that information with you so that you're all comfortable with it. But we can put draft policies out so that those in the community who are concerned, but they need to share that information at a city council meeting, not at a civilian police review board.
Well,
meeting.
and I don't know, but for me, city council has enough on their agenda that for any one item, there is a limited time. And for me, all you have to do is look at our agenda. We don't have a lot of cases coming up, and we do have the opportunity to provide in a similar setup with cameras rolling and with opportunity of people to come speak up, because we do have the time. I'm afraid that in city council, from budget to other issues, by necessity, the discussion is limited. And this is the kind of policy that is that can create a lot of friction out there. And the better discussed it is beforehand, when the moment of crisis comes, we have each other to report to on, well, we discussed that and we agreed this. We didn't know this was going to happen, but we tried our best. And you were there and I was there and we tried our best. Because the use of tasers is controversial, and because whenever something happens that is a little bit harder, a judgment call or a situation, it will be in our hands. And personally, having gone through this reading and wordsmithing, I'm not yet comfortable that that we are there yet. I don't say that we're going to reach consensus or full agreement that every part of it is, but I think that all voices should put themselves forward, because ultimately it doesn't rest on me, it rests on the elected representative. And they need to be informed as much as possible before they walk into being the ones responsible for approving a full policy. And I'm not saying indefinitely, I'm just saying that if we give that opportunity within our stewardship or whatever we have, then we have an opportunity to contribute to that charge which is ours, and that is the relationship with the community when it comes to police matters.
What I would like to do first, I really have a couple of things. First of all, do we have any questions from other board members? Diane or Ivy, do you have any questions that you'd like to pose?
I don't have a question, but I want to thank my two fellow board members, because I know this was a big job, and thank the chief for providing such a wonderful notebook full of information that I read and tried to digest some of it. I read this. To me, it was announced that it was on our agenda, and I share your wish to have more public involvement. I just don't know if we'll get it, because we didn't get it today, and we might have. I don't know what our role is today in vis-a-vis the policy. So that's a question to our chair.
Ivy?
I guess my concern, based upon what I just heard from Ricardo, is the possible precedents that could set on us taking that responsibility of listening to the concerns of the taser use based on how he presented. And I totally feel that the citizens, they have been given an opportunity, it was put out, but I see that more as a role within the community role with the meetings that we already have afforded based upon what Chief Conley has just said. To me, it's taken away the true essence or the sense of what the Civilian Police Review Board is, and it could possibly in my opinion, given us more responsibility than what the board intention is and the guidelines of our ordinance. That's just my opinion.
Chief, what, in general, what was your timeline for this?
I was going to get feedback from you folks on any other additional changes here. I was going to work with Todd, and Rich Searles was going to start the process so that I would like training to start no later than mid-December. Now, that means I would have to present to the city council, at which point I thought the city council were the ones. Now, you have to also remember, Mr. Diaz, that I did go to the American Civil Liberties Union meetings, and I presented to a number of faith-based groups, and I presented publicly at several different city council meetings. So I think a lot of people have already heard the process, not the completed policy, but quite frankly, the policy is so restrictive, I would find it difficult to believe that a lot of folks are going to have a lot of trouble with it.
So, and I hear you, because we have been in the process for the last 2 months, at least on my participation of it. But this went on the agenda on Friday. And that's what bothers me. For such an important policy approval, at least the recommendation, getting the go-ahead, 5 days is...
I'm not asking for your approval. I'm asking for a policy that I am going to present to the city council, and the city council are the folks that are going to make the decision as to whether or not we can move forward with the process.
And therefore, within our prerogative, from here until then, we can put together whatever else comments, because in this case, so we in the inner circle have 5 days. The rest of the public hasn't seen the policy up until, it's Friday, it's Monday. So we have 3 days in which people have seen it. So we could call a meeting from here until then to provide better feedback for you, not because we haven't sought it, but because we finally have a policy for them to do. I'll give you an example. One of the things that I noticed in the policy and the recommendations in the ACLU one was that officers shouldn't have to suffer the use of a taser on themselves as part of the training. And I said, wow, that means they don't really know what it entails and how powerful it is, because the deterrent of just showing it seems to scare off a lot of people into complying. And so as we discussed it, we came to a very quick agreement as to no, officers should suffer it so that they know what it's like and they know the power of it and they know also the limitations of it. ACLU had its reasons for putting something forward. In a way, I think we made it more conservative, more restrictive, but I have no idea what they think about a change like that, which is pretty major. It was major in which what they proposed, and we went against it, whether it's more conservative or not. It's still a big enough change that I would want to hear their opinion at this point. And so on. There are enough little pieces in here that I don't know if it's in 2 weeks or if we do 3 weeks, but that we have an opening for the public to hear it.
Are we posting this on the city website, or are we there yet, or?
It's on the CPRB's
Okay,
sort
but,
of page.
So we
can
would
put it
have the
somewhere
ability,
else, too.
should we want to make it a bit more prominent and say it's out there, or remind people that it's on our website. Is that correct? Todd, we could do that?
Yes.
Okay, and then the other thing, of course, is could we, as a function of that, solicit written comments if we think there's more out there? And really kind of gauge where the concerns are versus and say, okay, do we need to bring this together? But I think I want to do this in a relatively short period of time so that we can move this forward. And I guess I'm always skittish about, we want to get it right. Don't get me wrong, we want to get it right. But we don't want to, the more we put it off, the greater is the likelihood that we're going to find ourselves with an incident that we're not handling properly, which is, to my mind, an equal concern. So what I would propose is that we post this and solicit written comment. I think we're certainly going to get enough media coverage as a function of this. And then, as a function of that, if we feel that there is written comment to merit it, let us get together and visit this once more. I guess I have more confidence in the job that you did in terms of where we're at and having looked at this and looked at the restrictions and, again, fulfilled our 3 requirements. I mean, I'm pleased that the ACLU signed off for the most part of the things we've done, all these other things, but we fulfilled our 3 requirements of stringent training, requirement with, and I noticed this, do we have this for use of force or other things, that a sergeant is supposed to be on the scene if it looks like there's some, I mean, is that in other policies that you have?
It is.
Okay, so our expectation is if there's a reasonable expectation that a taser may be deployed, that a sergeant or supervisor needs to be heading in that direction.
Correct.
Right? Okay, so we have our training, we have our supervision, and we have our accountability. I think if there's additional concerns, I for one, would be happy to have those submitted in writing and then decide whether we have to have an additional meeting or not. Yeah.
So can I sort of add a point? So the method in which we would decide, or the procedure by which we would decide whether or not to have a subsequent meeting, I'm not exactly sure how that would happen. Unless it's going to be a call of the chair, it would not be a vote, because otherwise we would have to actually go into open session in order to do that.
I would say that, and, you know, I guess you'd have to have faith in my good faith efforts that said, if I say that, my goodness, we've got some issues, and if you said, Tom, I really want to have a meeting, we'll have a meeting. I don't, you know, it's not like I'm going to sit there and go, let's see if I can come up with some kind of machinations, and we won't have the meeting. I mean, that's, but I think that the 2 things is, one, the issue's been out, and 2, I want some level of timeliness that we don't let this drag on. I think that's something that we're tasked with, and going along with what Ivy said, you know, really the ultimate responsibility for this rests with our city council. You know, I think we did the legwork here, and I think that, you know, we know that we're going to have to deal with some of the results of this, and we took that role. Now the question is, how much more do we need to do? And I guess I would prefer to do it that way. Yeah.
So I guess as staff, what I would ask is that if you would like to have a meeting, that there be some type of majority vote on a meeting or not on a meeting. And the reason I'm saying that, and that's just my recommendation, you can choose to take it or
I'm good
not.
with that. I'm good with that. I'm good with that. Yeah,
I'm not very clear on the purpose of our meeting.
Well,
when we would meet, so help me with that.
what we want to do is, and hopefully in some way satisfy Ricardo's concerns, we post this prominently, that this is the policy, and for more than 5 days, which is where we have thus far. So we post this, you know, maybe another 5, 8 days, whatever it is, solicit comment, and if we feel that there is sufficient comment, I would have you poll the board and say, okay, do we need to have a meeting?
Who's going to do comment review?
All of us.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't we all receive that?
Yeah. Can I
Yeah.
take a turn? I think the way to stimulate the most productive and the most timely response about the TASER policy is for us to vote tonight to forward it to the city council. I've been to meetings in the city council where this room was completely full. I'll bet you if we call another meeting, there are going to, of the CPRB, there are going to be as many people here as there are tonight, because like it or not, the community has formed an impression about what this review board does, and hopefully they think we're fairly effective at the things that we do. But I think they know that where they really try to get to the system is in those city council meetings.
Can we do that without that having been on the agenda? That's my, I don't think. we can
Decide
do
on having a meeting
that.
or
I don't
not,
think we
a
can.
further meeting.
we can
Well,
pass
no,
it
I
without
think
having
he's
been.
asking whether, were you
I
asking
don't
whether or
think we
not you
can
can
pass
vote to
approval
forward it to
tonight
the city
without it
council?
having been on the agenda.
Yeah.
Is it in
Is that
our
right?
purview to approve or not?
That's one of the reasons I didn't word it as such.
Okay.
Because it wasn't my understanding that
Okay.
he was coming for approval.
Right,
It was
this
more
is
of a-
just for review.
So let me
Right.
appeal to another side of what it is that we do, because I think Ivy's concern is, are we going beyond? One of our charges is to educate the community as to police functions and how well, it is a relationship role. It is building the public's trust in our present system. In my experience, that comes through education. That comes through, and education by its nature is once, a twice, a 3 times. When do people get it? It depends on the person. But when you provide the opportunity for people to be educated as to anything, but in this case what the policy says, then you can hold people to say, you know, this is your opportunity to say something. If not, that's okay. Because I think this is not, forget, no, not forget, but let us put aside the fact that this is a policy that will be implementation. It constrains the officers, it educates the officers, it goes through all that, but the public itself has to know enough of how things work. I have been enlightened a lot by being part of the ride-alongs and about the trainings and all that. I wonder if people know out there that when an officer has to pull a gun because there is imminent danger, they shoot to kill. There is no, the biggest misconception I have encountered out there is when I learned that they shoot to kill every time and there's no shooting at the knees and there's no shooting for
Well, actually,
staring.
we shoot to stop the threat.
Right.
And that means by shooting in the knee, you're not stopping the threat because potentially they still have full function of their arms and they're capable of continuing
That's right. And
to
but if
aggressively
they're
assault
armed
you.
and whatever else, there is no anything.
So we don't train people to shoot to kill. We train people to stop the threat.
Okay, that's a much better way of phrasing it, and thank you. It translates onto the same thing that the misconception out there is that there is some other alternative. I now understand, having been through the training, that there are many times in which you actually don't have any other recourse. Something needs to stop and the person is not listening, and pulling your gun means it's got to be used to stop that threat. I did not understand that. I did not
With
know
all
that it
due
was
respect,
basically
Mr.
law.
Diaz, I've presented that 15 different times over the course of the last 8 months since the original videotape that led us to where we are today. I routinely shared that information with people in the community, all kinds of people in the community. At what point do we say how many more people do we need to reach? I guess I just need to figure out some timeline. This is 8 months into this request.
Chief, let me just, excuse me for interrupting. What was your expectation of us this evening when you brought this? That's
Share
what I'd
with-
like to have clarified.
Share with me any concerns, additional comments, any other things in the policy that you feel you would feel comfortable expressing, or if you said, had questions about the policy itself, between the 4 of us, hopefully we would be able to say, here's how we came. Why would you, for instance, remove the drive stun? Because enough public perception, enough concern, enough about what we read, led us to believe that we are erring on the side of caution, so we're going to eliminate that concern from the people in the community. So those are the kind of things I was looking for. Once you said, yes, I think we're all comfortable with this policy, my next step was to make arrangements to go to the city council. First of all, working with Todd for the procedural end to make sure that we have the review process in place, and then go to the city council so that by December, Rich Searles is starting to train our police officers.
Chief, question. What is the harm of putting that back a month?
You mean
putting that
doing it to
timeline.
January?
Yeah.
Well, other than, I mean, I can't say that there is a harm. The harm is every day that we wait, the potential for another event could possibly be faced by one of our officers.
Yes, and I wouldn't want to put an officer in danger, but what I'm saying is, we've lived without a policy this long and without tasers for this long. I'm just saying, give it one more chance, because in education, you never know.
All right,
I think we have something
let me,
new.
what's the pleasure of the board? Does anyone have any, what is your pleasure? We know what Mr. Diaz's position is. Is everyone in agreement? Does someone want to do something differently? I need to know that.
I have a question, because Chief, when you ask, are we comfortable with this, does that mean we're voting to accept it? I mean, it's not our role, really, only informally, I would think, you would want our input or comments.
Correct. Am I saying, are you
Okay.
comfortable with
Okay.
the design, with the implementation, with the removal of certain protocol that we've seen in 15 other policies that were provided to you? Are there other things in this policy that concern you that maybe I can try to address or explain?
Okay, well.
That was my question.
Could I respond to that
Sure.
question that's put to us? The one thing that I was unclear on is on page 6, where it says, information and statistics, et cetera, will be periodically made available to the CPRB. And then, right below that, 309.6.3 said, all uses will be reported to the CPRB. I'm not sure what the difference between those two reports would be, or information statistics.
All right, so help me out. Page 6,
At the very top,
very top, taser information and statistics.
right, with identifying, will periodically be made to us.
Actually, Rich, we might have not been clear on this one, because I think we were going for the word regularly, so that it would match exactly as Diane is pointing out. 309.61, the very last sentence, and then 309.63, there is a gap. I think Diane's pointing it out, and we had talked through, but it might not have made it to the final revision.
Ricardo, what are you saying? There's a,
There's a gap in that, the difference between periodically and all reports
yeah. Well,
means it leaves a gap as to what is that period, and if it's gonna be all reports, it almost deals with the question of that procedure of the pilot.
Of the chart, of
Of a pilot period.
yeah.
So if we said regularly or monthly or quarterly, is
I'm fine with that.
It closes the gap.
I
and
don't
it-
know why we said periodically.
Yeah, no, I think we
just don't
discussed it,
recall.
but it just didn't make it because we were in
So we
that-
can change periodically to regularly.
to regularly, or quarterly or monthly, whichever one fits you guys' pleasure. I just know that,
what matches what we do now, Todd? Quarterly or?
well, we
So
reported this.
we're not currently collecting, the only statistics that we actually house and collect are of complaints filed under the ordinance.
And you
And we
let
get
it-
those at each filing.
And you let us know about those when you get
Yes,
them.
yes.
So,
And I think that's, come to think of it now, thinking back to why periodically, because there may be long periods of time where there's no information, but periodically, when a taser not a deployment, but a removal is encountered, at that point, I would present that information to Todd, and Todd would share that information with you. So it's a matter of semantics, to be honest with you. We could say regularly, we could say as they become available.
Yeah. I
and
don't
then,
Diane, whatever you feel comfortable with.
but then what's the difference between that sentence and right below it, 309.63?
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're seeing
A
as the
little
redundancy.
redundancy, yeah.
Well, what I think what was happening
No.
is
No.
that, yeah, specifically, that section is in relationship to the TASER form. So we were trying to work down to a one-page format about the critical information that would be retrieved from each incident. And then went into another report section that we have. And then, so we've got the officer in charge and the supervisor working on a TASER form, some other distillation of reports that we want, and then that the CPRB will be notified about that. And the language could be a little bit cleaner, but that's what I'm thinking now about, the way that it reads.
So-
Diane,
Yeah.
as I look at this more, the more
Yeah.
I realize I think the direction we were going. With respect to the first sentence on page 6 that says TASER information and statistics,
Right,
we will have a chart that literally every time a TASER is removed from the holster will be documented, even if it's not deployed. Don't forget, the key term is deployed. That means the dart's being shot out. Even if it's not deployed, if it's just simply removed, we will have a chart that identifies that. Because of that 6-month period, we didn't specify 6 months. We said periodically we will provide that information to the CPRB for their review. In 309.6.3, I think it should read, the chief of police or his designee shall report all deployments
Okay.
rather than uses.
that clears it up.
And that's, that's an apology on,
Okay.
I will take responsibility for that because our eyes were crossed. That's why this says draft.
Right.
It's really important
Right.
everybody
Right.
understand that I can change use to actual deployments because you will get all of those. All of those.
So since I have a reputation for a little pickiness, backing
And we're
up
glad you do.
to page 5, under the TASER form, the list, O, was subject, engaged or intended in engaging in self-harm behavior or harm to others? Should be added there at the end of that?
That's where Scott's question or stipulation comes in. When you're filling out a form, if you put in a box that just a yes, no, then that clarifies the rest of the report, because general policy would be that there is harm involved, but we wanted to clarify that there are times at which they are threatening to use something on themselves, and that provides for a cleaner report on the one-pager,
Okay.
I think, Rich. Okay.
No. That's why I said sit up here
I know,
instead of
it's been
sitting
a little
back
while.
there.
I thought I was going to escape. Okay, so with respect to the word periodic, I think the reason we didn't put in a specified time was because if you changed it from, say, monthly to quarterly, we'd have to go back and republish the policy. So one of the things you try to avoid when writing policies are things like that, because periodically encompasses both monthly and quarterly. So that was to that question.
Okay.
With respect to self-harm, I believe Mr. Diaz is correct. We specifically wanted to collect that information, whether or not they were suicidal,
Okay,
that sort of thing.
okay. Thank you. That's it.
So for clarification, should we leave periodically? Are you comfortable with that? And change uses to deployments? Okay, I can do that.
Chief, question on procedures, because that's where the pilot period will be stipulated. That happens as part of your proposal to the council when it gets to that, or it's bounced around beforehand? Because, again, because I'd like to make this as instructive as possible to people out there that the intention is not only conservative use, but also, we want to have the spirit of usage and documenting and transparency as salient as possible. So that's why I'm interested as to that procedure will affect use of policy. I had a question thrown at me today, and I was able to defend it thanks to our discussions, was So what happens when somebody wants, when an officer uses it, in mean-spirited? I say, well, that's the procedure. They will go through every review, just like every deployment of the taser is like using a firearm. There is a report, you guys do an investigation. You guys will carry, you have procedure for that, right?
Correct.
And it was easy for me to quote that, but it wasn't it was not apparent in our present policy that policy, that procedure is very detailed, if you will. You don't want to be in a situation in which there is no follow-up when a police officer uses.
Right, but that wouldn't fall under this policy, Mr. Diaz. That would fall under the discipline policy, or it would fall under the response to resistance overview. I mean, there are other policies that address how
And so-
the police department conducts internal investigations.
Exactly. And so all I'm saying is, as we put this forward, people need to know what those are so that they can diffuse, alleviate, learn that there are good policies already in place for discipline. Because from this document, we don't have anything that says when tasers, that's the main fear out there, right? In opposition, is that the tasers are used wrongly. And so what happens when they do? And right now, as we write the policy, it refers to basically another part of the book that most people don't have in front of them. So I'm saying that as we put this out there, we provide links for that.
Just real quick, just in that little exchange, he corrected and told us there was a policy for the misuse of it. So the policies are there. So I would assume that when those questions and things arise, within the right realm, those things will be brought up and handled with the policies that are there.
Right. And to clarify, we don't write a policy that says a police officer will not spit on another human being. We don't write a policy that is, we can't, it's impossible to address every action that a police officer takes during his or her tour of duty. So we have a very lengthy policy that addresses conduct and behavior. And in that, it says you won't break the law, you won't physically abuse the rights of human beings and people in our community. I mean, there are 48 or 53 different policies that intertwine to have a police department function on a daily basis. Nowhere, I don't think, will you read that a policy will currently say, and you will not take a taser and stick it to a person's ear. I mean, it's not that specific. But there are clearly policies that control the behavior with respect to use of force of police officers.
And I would assume that also would be a function of adherence to training principles that have been established.
Precisely correct.
For those people.
Right. And I thought in this policy at one point, because there was such a concern, that we addressed the issue of, because the implication that it can be used as a torture, at some point, we even addressed that somewhere in here. I can't find it.
No, you did.
Okay.
Well, we did a couple of things in that regard. We took out the drive stun, which was a pain compliance thing we didn't like. We also took out the, if you would, arc testing in front of a person, which we felt was a potential misuse. Exactly where that language, I mean, a lot of that was just retracted from what
I
we
did
had
find
before.
under 309, on page 3, under 309.5.2, special deployment considerations, the taser shall not be used to psychologically torment, elicit statements, or to punish any individual. So, I mean, there's a general statement that we extracted from a variety of other policies throughout the state that we as a subcommittee felt it was important to reinforce that to make the community comfortable in knowing that we won't do that.
And I think, in spite of all the things I've said or alongside, this is written, to the best of our knowledge, as a good faith effort of protecting community and protecting the officers. Because it's not just the officers that can misbehave, it's, you know, the existence of this means that somebody out there is misbehaving, and it requires this option. So I gotta say that, because it's very easy to just put it on the police officers, but the fact is, once in a while, the person is causing harm, and they need to be somehow constrained to do as they should.
Well, Ricardo, I guess I'm kind of reaching the point where I'm thinking to myself, we delay, the council delays, we continue. You know, I think that I would, from my personal point of view, would like to get this posted, make it available, and get it to the council, and let that process begin to take place, which I'm sure will be quite thorough, as opposed to keeping it here. If we had problems with, I would be really concerned if our group said, we really don't want to review those TASER things. Then I think we really needed to start over. And I think we're past that. I think that we've done, through your good efforts and Scott's, we created this very restrictive policy, and I would just as soon get it to the elected officials and let them deal with what they need to deal with while we're working on what we need to do to fold this policy into the kinds of things that we do. I'm just letting you know where I'm at.
Could I don't know if a motion is in order, but I would, if it is, I would say that I would repeat thanks to the members of this committee that this board, we have been involved, especially through their efforts in having serious input into the proposed policy, and that we've had an opportunity to, the rest of us, add whatever thoughts we have about it, and that we had a good discussion. And I don't know if that's a motion.
Well, all you need to say is that the board then
Feels confident.
agrees to forward this to the city council. You know, given the responsibilities of the CPRB as defined by the ordinance, or however you want to.
With the understanding that this will be made available to the public.
And quite frankly, I feel that we've fulfilled our responsibilities. I'm very comfortable with that, and I don't want, thanks to you two, I think we've done what our job is. And I think that the rest of it needs to go to the council and the elected officials. That's just, like I said, that's where I'm at, so.
Okay, and at the risk of disrespect, because to ourselves and the process, the content, you know, we've advanced, and I'm very confident that we've done our best shot up to now. If we forward, I would add the stipulation that we don't endorse it and endorse the use of tasers, and we clarify it. But I have to reserve, I guess, I have to put my reservation as to, have we put it out there enough? Because up to now, there was no policy. We have informed people, but there's a month and a half, or 2 months almost, between now and city council. If our purpose is to educate, I would not want to step back from it now. We have started on the policy, we have a policy to get ideas from, and to me, it's a missed opportunity and almost a disservice to the public to not put it before them as much as possible and let them put their comments forward.
Have you made a motion? Is
Can
that
I-
correct?
Well, I made it jointly with Scott.
With Scott. Is there a second for Diane's motion?
Sure, I'll second it.
Okay. Now, is there any discussion?
Yeah,
So-
I just want to clarify precisely what the motion is for the record. Because
That's fine, that's fine.
I'm concerned that it's not a motion to forward it to the council.
No, I don't think that, I think
Okay.
it is. I think that's what Diane's saying, isn't it?
Is that our role?
I think certainly you all could come to a consensus that you have no major objections to the document as it stands.
Without a motion?
Yeah. And my only
I don't know
concern
if
is
we'll come to
it's
a
not necessary.
consensus.
It may not be a majority consensus.
Right.
Or it may not be a unanimous
Or
consensus.
unanimous. Can we not add then what we discussed earlier, that if significant comments are made, that the chair feels we need to discuss further?
Well, I think, see, I have full faith that the council is going to be receiving these comments and have the ability to change things as well. I mean, I think that we have done what our job is. I'm just, as I said, I've said that, but I think we've done what our job is, and what our job next to do is to forward to the council. I'm very happy, Ricardo, to agree that, you know, we want to encourage the council to make sure that folks are fully aware of what we're doing, though I'm fairly certain they will be. But I think, I mean, I have no problem endorsing, you know, that level of participation. But I think that, I think our role at this point is to forward it to the elected officials. And so, let me try this without being too heavy-handed. Let me poll you and say, are we ready to just, do we have a consensus to forward this to the council?
I'm have to say, it's not our role to agree whether it goes to the council. I don't see that as my role. Because it's going to the council whether I agree or disagree, because that's not our job. I think we're mixing up what our role is as CPR, as the board. I really see a mixture.
Well, I think in some ways, the police department has asked for our input. We've offered that, it's been asked, and also understand that I think, for lack of a better term, from a respectful point of view, is that when this is all over, the people reviewing this is gonna be us. And so for that point, we've had that kind of input. That's why I feel that we have, you know, that's why we have the role we do, is because when it's all over with, we're the one that's gonna be reviewing it.
But what I'm hearing is, if we decide or should decide unanimously, we don't want this to go on to the city council.
Well, it's probably gonna go anyway.
Yeah, so we don't have approval and we don't have a forwarding responsibility, so Ivy's correct.
That's what it sounded like.
So,
Well, but the point being is that with the amount of work that you two have put in and put this in jointly with the department, I think that at some point we have to say, we're sending this to the council to the next step. And we have to play some role in this, as opposed to, you've just done this and now we're just gonna let it float in space and let the department move it wherever they wanna go. I think that we have to Ivy, what role would you have us play?
I guess the role that I thought we were intended to do, which was when this was presented to us, to add our input based upon what our board members have done, and then let the process continue on from there.
so for me, and this is partly, I mean, this is honestly felt, to thank the police department, thank the chief, thank Lieutenant?
Yes.
I can't read stripes
It's
from
okay.
here, so, not that I could even if I could see them, but Lieutenant Searles, for the opportunity to participate and for this exchange, because it is very healthy, it has been very educational, and I think that you probably could have just sent it to city council and moved forward, but I appreciate this opportunity to participate, and that is,
Could we turn this around and say, does anyone have any objection to it being forwarded to the council?
I have no objection to it being forwarded to the council. I would rather that come in a statement, like a motion that was passed and voted to hold this group accountable for a process that it was asked to contribute to. But not everyone may feel that way.
So I just want to add, if that is what you would like, at least it's my understanding that we would need to put such an approval on an agenda. And my understanding is that the purpose of having the chief come and present the work that was done would be to get feedback, but ultimately it's the chief's policy. And so if and the role is advisory here. So if the chief decided to accept everything that came as a result of the feedback, let's just say, you know, Diane made additional feedback, right? It would still be up to the chief's discretion as the department head, the form in which and the content of the policy that's forwarded and when it's forwarded. And so I guess my real concern is if there will be an approval and a formal sending to the council, I think it would be best to have a meeting where there's an agenda that actually spells that
Well,
out.
I mean,
Yeah.
And I think anything else,
if the normal format is you've come and asked for us for our input, and it's going to the council, then our work is done. And I can live with that as well.
Well, certainly if it meant that it had to be posted, I mean, I don't understand that, Todd.
Well, if we had a motion and we were going through all this, and I don't think that's where we're at.
So if I can clarify then, your first, or your attempt at a motion was that are there any objections to the document? And so I can tell you, I would say no. And then I would say that we still seek out further contributions from the public, because they can be separated. We can be okay with it, but I want the public to be okay with it.
Well, and I think that's fine, and I think that's exactly what's gonna happen as it moves to the council. That's why I think we're gonna accomplish both of those goals. I don't think those goals rest solely on us.
If the group doesn't feel like we need a motion and a pass-through consensus is all that we're looking for, then I'm great to go. Chief, thank you.
You bet.
Brian, thank you.
I'll make that change that you suggested.
Wonderful.
Okay, so are we there?
I think we're
Okay,
there.
so now let me take the opportunity to call for or ask you all that we do provide some sort of feedback loop so that when it gets to council, some of this has already been aired from the public a little bit more. And that is whether it's the written consent, written comments, or we actually have a meeting, and I would be happy to help arrange so that if only 5 people show up, those 5 people get their voice recorded. I know it seems excessive, but whenever we're doing something that affects people, even one is important enough to listen to.
When are you planning to take this to the council?
Late November.
So we certainly would want to have any additional input that we have before that. Like early November,
Okay,
right?
sure.
All right, can we go back? Ricardo, will you be happy with written comments so that we can at least see that if our meeting is required? I'm not trying to dodge the meeting, I just want to make sure it's required. Will you be happy with that? And then we'll do a polling and say, we would be more comfortable if we have the meeting as a result of the written comments. Can you live with that?
I could live with it.
Okay, are we okay with that? Is that fair enough? All right, so you're going to post it appropriately and ask for written comments, and you're also going to notify us of those written comments as well. And then based on that, we'll see what we can do. But in the meantime,
I will make the correction that Diane suggested, and then I'm going to move forward with this
I
policy.
think that's where we're at.
Good. And I will work with Todd on the
Right.
procedure.
Okay. Okay, in closing this discussion, again, and I know we've said this, I want to thank our 2 members for their hard work and their input, and the success of this really is a function of the job that you and Lieutenant Searles and the department have done. And I think ultimately, if this saves one life, this was time very well spent, and I think that's what our job, among other things, is to do. So thank you very much. And then I think we can move along with our agenda, which are we at old business? New business?
New business.
Is there any new business to come before the board? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you, everyone.